Hey guys, it's Connor. You're watching the JavaScript Mastery series, and in this video we are going to be covering loops. What are loops and why do we use them? All the different types of loops in JavaScript. So we'll go through the while loops. Then we will look at the for of loop, which is kind of an old school loop. Then we'll look at more modern ways of looping iterable items in JavaScript with for in, and then we will look at how we can use the for of loop to loop objects. So let's get started. So loops are exactly what they sound like. If you imagine my finger being a line of code being executed, then in our code base we sometimes want to loop back on ourselves and keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. So you may be continuously looping because you're waiting for something to happen or some kind of condition to change. Maybe you are looping through the itinerary of a character and you're looping through each item because you want to see if they have a magic potion, for example. Or maybe you just want to repetitively repeat a single task. Maybe you have a gun and you want to continuously fire off multiple bullets and you want to do that 40 to 50 times for a round. You get the picture. So with the while loop, we want to continuously perform a action over and over again while a given condition is true. So while it's raining, keep umbrella above head. While it's not game over, keep increasing the score. While still awake, keep coding. In this example, we have a while loop, and while the player's level is less than 10, we're going to continuously increment the level of the player. Then when we run this, you can see the player is continuously leveled up until they reach the maximum level, and we can produce a loop on each iteration. Now be careful guys, because with a while loop, if the condition that you're checking against ever finds itself in a position where it can never be false, then you could end up with an infinite loop, and it's just gonna keep on running until your program runs out of memory. So just imagine, instead of we're checking while the player level is less than 10, but instead of increasing it, imagine we was decreasing it, and we're going to continuously perform. We are going to continuously perform this action while the player level is less than 10, but it's always going to be less than 10 because we're just, and look at that guys, that's just going to continuously run indefinitely, which we don't want. So watch out for that while using while loops. The second kind of while loop is a do while loop. So a while loop is almost the same as a while loop, but the condition sits on the bottom of the statement. And what this means is, regardless of whether this condition is true or false, it's always going to execute the code in this block at least one time, even if it's false, right? So maybe so in this example, we're rolling a dice and we want to continue rolling that dice while the value is not 6. And of course, we always want to make sure we are initially rolling that dice at least once. So this loop isn't used very often, and there's not many use cases for it. I actually don't think I've ever used it myself, but this is an example of where you may want to use it. So while loop will only run on the first iteration if the condition is true, whereas a do while loop will always run the first iteration, and this code between the block will always run at least once. Okay, the for loop, the classic loop, the boomer loop. So with the for loop, it has 3 key components. You got the initialization, where we set up our loop variable. We got the condition that determines where the loop stops. So in this example, it's going to stop when this becomes false. So once this I value becomes greater or equal to the length of this array, and then we've got the increment or decrement, which updates the loop variable for each iteration. So in this example, I equals 0. This is our initialization. We're going to continuously run it until this is false, and then we're going to keep incrementing it. Now when we run this, as you can see, we are console.login item, which is I plus 1. So it starts off at 0. There we have 1. And then you're going to use I to access the index in this array, and on each iteration it's going through and looping through all of these. Now the for loop can also work in reverse, so maybe you want to assign it to player inventory.length -1 because we start at 0, and then when I is greater than 0, and then we can decrement it. Typo. As you can see, checking item 4, 3, 2, 1. My bad. So I'll keep going while it's greater than or equal to 0, and then we get 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's a for loop. You know, it was commonly used when you wanted to loop through an array just like this. Maybe if you just wanted to perform an action X amount of times, maybe you just want to do I equals. So maybe if you wanted to perform action 50 times, and then we say I is less than 50, then maybe what you want to, and then maybe it's because you want to fire a round from gun. Rounds, then we just go I plus 1. So I'll set the 0. And here's another example. Start that from 0. And here we might want to perform this action 50 times if we're firing a round from a gun, for example. So we call this the classic loop, the boomer loop. And in the next segment, you will see how we can use more modern iteration methods to make this less verbose and easy to read. There is a bit of a legend, or is legend the right word? There's a belief that there's some performance benefits of using a traditional for loop. Now, in a modern JavaScript interpreter, there's no actual proof that this exists. But if you are doing something extreme like high frequency trading and you're looping over something a ridiculous amount of times, and there's massive benefits to gaining like a 0.001 of a second advantage, that could be something worth exploring. But for 99.999% of the cases, I wouldn't be trying to use a for loop for any kind of performance gains. Also, there's a lot of different ways you can gain that kind of performance if performance becomes a bottleneck when you're looping over something. So yeah, just putting it out there and letting you guys know, because this is the Mastery series and we cover everything. But yeah, not something I would run away and try and do or implement, because I don't go into a coding interview and say, hey, I used a for loop because there's performance benefits. Just don't do that. But just be aware that there's a belief that there may potentially be some performance benefits when it comes to using a traditional for loop. For of loop introduced in ES6, not brand new, it's been around for a bit now, but a lot newer than those while loops and those for loops. So we can use this to iterate over anything in JavaScript that is iterable. So in JavaScript, arrays are iterable, strings are iterable, and something called sets and maps, which we will cover on a more advanced video, is also iterable. So we're going to keep this example here of player inventory. We saw how we loop this with a for loop. Now if we can do the same thing using the for of loops, or for item of player inventory. And as you can see, not exactly the same because we didn't include the index, but we can loop this array with this syntax, which looks a lot cleaner. It's less verbose and easier to read. And this variable here already represents the element in that array, so we don't have to, say, create a custom variable and assign it to the player inventory at that index. So it's just a more modern, cleaner way that we can iterate over not just arrays, but anything in JavaScript that's iterable. So we could do the same thing for a string. So let's call this welcome welcome player message, welcome to the game, and let's see if the cursor AI knows exactly what I want to do. Yeah, it does. And as you will see, look at that, we can also iterate a string, because strings in a lot of ways behave like arrays in JavaScript, like an array of characters. We won't demonstrate the set and map because we haven't covered those yet, and we'll cover those in a more advanced video. But the bottom line is, whenever we want to iterate over anything in JavaScript that is iterable, we can use the for of loop. It's cleaner, it's nicer, and it's easier to read. Now, the iteration in for of is live. What does this mean? It means if you modify the array during iteration, it affects the loop, and this can lead to an infinite loop. So let's just say we are looping this player inventory. If we was to push an item onto this inventory every single time in the iteration of the loop, what's going to happen is the loop is going to become infinite, right? Because we're continuously adding an item on to the loop every time we iterate over it. So even though we're iterating over it, we're adding a new one on the end, and it's just going to continue to go. So that's what we mean when we say the iteration is live. Now, when one thing that trips a lot of people up is when they try to use the for of on objects, which you cannot do. Remember, for of only works on things that are iterable in JavaScript, and objects are not iterable. If you want to use the for of on a object, you'll first have to convert either the keys or values to an array, or so let's say we have an object. So player inventory details. If you was to attempt to iterate over this object, as you can see, player inventory details is not iterable. So if you wanted to iterate over this, you would first have to either convert maybe the keys or the values to an array which is iterable. So let's do object.keys, and then when we log this, as you can see, we're getting all of the keys now for the object. And if we was to perhaps do something like player inventory details and then use that, now we're able to access those. Or you could do the same. So here we're just logging out all of those values, or you could do values, or you could just do values. So if you log that, then you can just get the values directly if you wanted to do that instead. If you wanted both of those, you could convert the object into an array containing both its key and index using object.entries. So object.entries, and then we can expose the key and value. Key and value. Then let's see what that looks like. There we get the key is stored and we get the value. So for of is the best approach when it comes to looping anything that is iterable in JavaScript. Now, if we want to directly iterate over an object in JavaScript, and we don't want to first break that object into something that is iterable by exposing its keys into a list or its values into a list, or both the key and value into a list using the object.entries, the for in is designed to just use with a traditional object. As you can see, we can iterate over the properties of this object using the for in. So you can technically still use the for in with an array, but it's just going to log out the keys of an array, which is like an object, which is just those index values. So when you're using array, it's better to use for of, and when you want to iterate over an object, it's better to use the for in. So we covered what loops are and why we use them. We also looked at all of the different loops that are available in JavaScript. We looked at the while, the do while, the for loop, then we looked at the for in and the for of. Now, if you're starting out, it could be slightly overwhelming, thinking, I need to memorize all of these loops and I need to know which one to use and when based on the current scenario. But don't stress you out, don't worry about it. It's more important just to know what loops are, how they work, and why. You can always have a note on all of those different loops in your back pocket that you can refer to at any time. Programming is about problem solving, not trying to memorize anything. And a lot of the times when we're looping in JavaScript, we're going to be looping over something, right? We're looping an array to see if an element exists, or we're looping over an object to see if there's this field and we want to see the value of that field. Now, JavaScript already has a ton of helpful methods that we can utilize to solve these common problems. So a lot of the times we're not actually writing while loops or for loops, because a lot of the times we're looping these things to try and do something, but thousands of other developers have already tried to do this as well, and it's become such a common use case to do these things that they've been built into the JavaScript's array API, and a lot of times we're just going to be using those. So I mean, maybe even if we're looping the inventory, for example, we can just use the for each method. If we say, well, I want to loop through this inventory to see if it has a sword, a lot of the times you're going to be using this method here, includes, that already comes available to us that we can just utilize, right? We don't need to loop this array ourselves and check each element to see if this exists. We can just make use of this existing method that's available to arrays in JavaScript. Maybe I want to know what's the index of health potion. Well, you can just use the index of method. What if I want to check if any of the elements meets a condition, or I want to see if everything's true, or maybe I need to calculate all of the shopping items in a shopping list. You know, a lot of these things, they already exist. And with AI, as soon as you use well-named variable, it's going to know exactly what you want to do anyway, right? Let's look at the total cost, 7, is that correct? So yeah, don't stress yourself out with thinking you need to memorize everything. Just know how loops work, know why they exist, and just be aware that a lot of the times you're not going to be using these loops to do some custom logic yourself. You're going to be using the pre-built methods that are available in JavaScript's rich API for arrays, which we are going to be covering in a future video when we go into more detail about arrays. So that's it for this video. So if you've got any value from this video, I appreciate any likes. They do help the algorithm, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the upcoming videos for the rest of the Blue Belt series. We're getting towards the end now, and see you in the next one.